Monsters. They haunt our dreams, our legends, our storybooks, and even our lives. Whatever the case, they represent our fear and wonder of the unknown. They can be the most horrifying beast to ever claw its way out of hell, or the most brutal dictator. With that said, they can also be our greatest inspirations, or our most noble of heroes. However, around the start of the 20th century, a select few decided to utilize the newborn art of film in order to express their imaginations regarding monsters. Before anyone actually started putting creatures to the silver screen, most films were more realistic, though no less experimental affairs. Others decided to break the mold and focus in a more fantastical direction. It is here that the monsters began to invade the movies, and they haven't stopped since. One of the great influential filmmakers of the 20th century began as early as 1902 to give the chance for America to dream again. The dream of exploring new worlds and dilly-dallying in flights of fancy instead of focusing on man's less than chivalrous qualities, such as war and poverty. That man was George Méliès. His most famous work, inspired by a number of sources, involved a simple yet momentous task at the time: a trip to the moon. In the film in question, a group of intrepid explorers decided to do the impossible: travel to the moon. In little time, they had already made a rocket suitable for the job, and, with much fanfare, they set out. Méliès was already stretching the imaginations of his viewers with the imagery, but once landfall was made, a series of fantastical sights awaited them all. This was decades before CGI did most of the background work, so every aspect had to be crafted by hand. Our first monsters are the moon's chief inhabitant, the Selenites. Named after the Greek goddess of the moon, they would have spent their time showcasing their flashy acrobatics, but the explorers had more violent plans. Being the kind of people you usually send to illustrate the opposite of diplomacy, they slaughtered a few, including the king of the Selenites, and they got the usual reception for it. Coupled with the alien stowaway that becomes an earthly prisoner in the end, it's no wonder many alien races in the future would want our heads for our imperialism. And this was no accident either. Méliès is often believed to have made this movie to poke fun at the rampant colonialism and superiority complexes the leading nations seemed to have at the time. It's not as if we can prove him wrong anyway. The most classic tale of scientific horror narrows down to the tragic tale of Victor Frankenstein and the monster he created out of human parts in an effort to play God. We won't get into the more severe interpretations of how well that ended, but the first account of it being put to the silver screen was unique, to say the least, even for something shot in 3 days. Rather than spend his time hiring hunchbacks and robbing graves, Victor's dream of a paragon of human beauty was going to be achieved through black magic. With a trusty cauldron, he whipped up several chemicals and let whatever dark forces out there do the rest. He probably forgot a few key ingredients, because the end result was a hunchback figure that craved his master's attention like a hound. Not good with rejection, he tormented the doctor all the way to his wedding day until Victor came to a remarkable discovery. As it turned out, the monster could be dispelled from existence through the power of love itself. In this case, love for his wife, Elizabeth. Now let's ruin this romantic moment, shall we? Did you know that Elizabeth is Victor's adopted sister in the book? No? Well, now you know. No, M. Night Shyamalan was not the first one to come up with the infamous twist ending. Sometimes Hollywood's most overused tropes can have the most unexpected of origins. Aside from that, this horror movie was actually well at home in its setting. As one can see, when your world is a cornucopia of utterly bonkers architecture, you might as well go insane once in a while. One man did, and this is what he left us with. Working at the asylum was enough to test anyone's sanity, but meeting up with the mystic Caligari was the final straw for one man. Calling himself that name from now on, he dabbled in his work and scored an assistant, Caesar the Somnambulist. And before anyone asks, that's a real word. Somnambulism is very much real. We just know it under a different title, sleepwalking. Not sure how it lets you see into the future though, but then again, we're not Caesar. Whatever the case, they terrorized the town and looked as deranged as they were, right until Caesar fell for another upcoming trend. Mainly, that of the monster seeking the opposite sex in the form of a human. One thing led to another, and all those years of unrest finally caught up with Caesar and caused him to die of sleep deprivation as Caligari flipped his lid and got committed. End of story. Or is it? Turns out, one of the inmates of the asylum was just projecting a little fantasy, and the real Caligari and Caesar are actually fairly normal people. Yet, despite this looking like the filmmakers were trying to narratively break the mold, this was actually because authority figures were never meant to be cast in a negative light in any form of media. Did we mention this was a German film? Yes. If only they knew what would follow in reality. Rabbi Judah, a renowned Jewish philosopher back in the day, was in a bind. His hometown of Prague was about to be sacked by the Holy Roman Empire unless he and his people conformed. Rather than take this lightly, he decided desperate measures were to be taken. So this handsome fellow, Astaroth the Demon Prince, was called upon for advice. It was simple: build a man out of clay and let magic do the rest. In the end, they ended up creating a creature whose name literally means in Hebrew, to be incomplete. The golem was perfect for housekeeping, and especially for intimidating your enemies, or, use gratitude when the hand of God tries to strike them down. However, keep in mind, demon. Deal. Never ends well, as we'll see plenty of times later. Whatever the case, Astaroth decided to butt in with a little possession, and havoc ensued. However, Judah was anything but stupid. He knew a few exorcism tricks up his sleeve, and restored the golem to a gentle state. Shame when a little girl accidentally took out the centerpiece in his chest. The whole thing just sort of ended there. In the dark of the night, there's always a monster waiting around every corner. The worst type of monster that calls this domain home is one that can not only think, but crave absolute disease and devastation. Ever hear of that one creature that transforms into a bat and lives to suck the life out of the living? There's a word for that: vampire. Now here's another word you should be duly familiar with: Nosferatu. Count Orlok isn't your typical Transylvanian wine-drinking psychopath. As you can probably tell by his rodent-like mug, he's more than that. Much like his much more popular successor, Count Dracula, he's God's claws in the entire town he dwells in. However, he's gotten much more antsy at the prospect of spreading his evil around, so he hitches a ride on a ship by doing what he does best, transforming into a swarm of rats and giving anyone he bites the bubonic plague. Though keep in mind, rats don't just start out carrying the plague. Fleas they have certainly do, so maybe Orlok holds dominion over them instead. Then again, he'd likely be too embarrassed to admit that. Whatever the case, Orlok was killing off the masses before a pure-hearted girl offered herself to him. With the power of the shadows by his side, Orlok may have gone his way after all. But wait, sun's coming up. Wanna take it in? Or, as all vampires do, burn out? Now why not just call this bloodsucker Dracula to begin with? Blame the Stoker estate for that. Before Bela Lugosi got the role, the estate had a firm copyright grip on the name, and the filmmakers had to resort to other vampires because of it. Luckily, Max Schreck, the actor behind Orlok, had more than enough odd mannerisms in order to get into character, leading many to believe he was the real deal. For all we know, it could have been true. The Greeks called them terrible lizards, but we know them as the dinosaurs. Unlike most examples on this journey, these beasts truly did exist millions of years ago before mysteriously dying out. How? Who knows? An asteroid? Climate change? Smoking? Anything could have happened. But did every last one of them get axed, or are they still somewhere living blissfully away from the confines of human society? Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was certainly a fan of this theory. Otherwise, why else would the Amazon rainforest house another world? A lost world, if you would. Professor Challenger was regarded as nothing but a rage-filled blowhard by his colleagues, but the fact he mentioned another world somewhere deep within South America was the last straw. Undeterred by public opinion, he rounded up an expedition and things went from there. Rather fast, actually. In no time at all, a passing Apatosaurus, or Brontosaurus for those who aren't up with the times, accidentally made sure their stay was a bit longer than expected. So the actual journey was on, and things were already escalating. We had the savage Allosaurus start a reign of terror that killed off an Edmontosaurus, introduced him to smoking, and pick on the wrong Triceratops family. There were other creatures as well, such as a Tyrannosaurus that made short work of an Agathmus and a Pteranodon, as well as a wily ape man that learned too late what too far meant. However, that Apatosaurus from earlier had one last ordeal to deal with, as she was suddenly ripped from her home and taken all the way to London. Yes, that otherwise imposing poster depicting a Tyrannosaurus ravaging a city might have been more than a bit misleading. As for what really happened, the sauropod responded accordingly. After hitting the river things, she promptly swam away and let society deal with the fact that they weren't done with being hounded by the remnants of the past just yet. All in all, a nice little prehistoric vacation where everyone got to see Willis O'Brien's top-notch stop-motion effect work. Stop motion, for those who are curious, basically involves taking a model, photographing that model, and then moving that model again, rinse, wash, repeat. It's much like animating a cartoon, and often looks the part. But back in the day, people genuinely believed that they were looking at real dinosaurs when they saw this movie. How we wish that were true. The opera is a fine place to mingle, to listen to the greatest hits of the early 20th century, and to occasionally get threatening letters from a psychopath hiding inside the very catacombs below you. Does that last bit perturb you? Get used to it. For most of the operas we showcase, there's always a specter of vengeance and spite to haunt it. A phantom, if you will. Based on the novel of the same name, The Phantom of the Opera has been subject to a number of adaptations, mainly in the form of stage plays and the movies. This film is one of the better recognized ones, featuring the man of many faces himself, Lon Chaney, as the Phantom, Eric. In it, Eric was a deformed escapee from the dreaded prison of Devil's Island. He made his reputation well known around a certain opera house with him sending threatening letters whenever the opera didn't go his way. He made good on his threats too, as the occasional murder would show them all their place. And then, one actress he falls for becomes the object of his obsession. All it took was one fallen chandelier to make that message clear. As the plot thickened, we got a good look at his underground home in the catacombs, as well as his mug. Take a good look, little lady. Of course, he finally decided it just wasn't worth it, and died on his organ out of heartbreak. At least, that's how the director originally envisioned it. Instead, he decided to go out to an immature prank right in front of an angry mob. In hindsight, not very smart. Very fatal, too. You all know him. You all hate him. Some people out there even worship him. He is the opposite of God, the ruler of hell, the unironic idol of rock bands that are severely out of touch with reality. He is Satan, or in this case, one of his aliases. Faust is often considered to be one of the best works of German literature, and is the magnum opus of its author and playwright, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. This man has depicted a classic tale about good and evil, with the latter being portrayed by none other than the devil himself. Curiously, there are 5 versions of this film, but that's a story for another day. Mephisto, as a Satan incarnation is apt to do, vied for control over the Earth. So, he and an archangel made a deal. If Mephisto were to successfully corrupt a human soul, the world would be his. After delivering a devastating plague, he finally succeeds in pushing one poor soul, Faust, to the brink of desperation. Oh sure, he got some cool healing powers, but at the cost of his soul and his privacy. Latching onto him like a parasite, Mephisto continued to tempt him further. Among their exploits included eternal youth, murder, and even winning the hearts of a maiden and her mother. Things went south for the both of them when Mephisto takes it too far and condemns the maiden to death. Faust forgoes his youth and power all just to be in the arms of his burning beloved, and thus we learn that the devil, as proven many, many times, is nothing but a complete loser. Welcome to the city of Metropolis. No, not the place the big blue Boy Scout of DC Comics flies over. I mean the city of the future where the rich and decadent can relax and enjoy any pleasure they wish. Shame if you're the working class though, because your days are basically numbered as you work away in conditions that wouldn't be outplaced in a slaver's gulch. Of course, talk of mediating tensions between the rich and the poor were starting to surface on account of a woman named Maria. Not content to lose the status quo, the ruler of the city had Dr. Rotwang, yes, really, do something about it. So what better way to handle the revolution than create a machine duplicate of your ex-girlfriend? The Maschinenmensch, or machine human in German, was born and she wasted no time reveling every cardinal sin out there. Her goal was clear though, create dissension within the revolution and give the higher-ups a good excuse to just up and kill them all. As with most rich societies, they didn't think far ahead. Before they knew it, the whole working area was flooded, and the rioters realized the real Maria would never have endangered their children like that. They reacted accordingly, and burnt that metal broad over a bonfire. Not the first way I deal with a hunk of junk, but whatever works.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
The tragic legend of Mary Shelley's yarn about how man should never, for the life of him, ever try to create a man out of the dead never really took off until 1931. Director James Whale had a vision of a scientist, a hunchback, and a spacious graveyard. Universal Studios was about to rise to the top, and all it took was a spark of lightning. Played by Boris Karloff, this creature had it worse off than the previous creation of the well-intended but slightly unhinged Dr. Frankenstein. Getting abused by hunchbacks and fire will do that to you. One escape later, his social cues were found to be fantastically weak compared to that of the novel's monster. Before he could evolve mentally, he tormented his creator until the inevitable burning windmill. But due to this film's popularity, his demise wasn't permanent. He went through many ventures over the years until 1948. Throughout them, he's been blown to bits, cast into a pit of sulfur, trapped in 2 burning buildings, trapped in a flood alongside a certain werewolf, and led into quicksand. It's without question that when Abbott and Costello started to irk him, he wasted no time walking into the flames. As one might guess, the Nosferatu known as Orlok was only the start when it came to movie vampires. Bram Stoker's very own Lord of the Night would soon show his face, played either famously by Bela Lugosi or John Carradine, and he was a most charismatic and infamous vampire indeed.
I am Dracula.
Yes, Dracula truly is the Lord of the Vampires. His origins can be dated all the way back to the 15th century. It is argued that the vampire was inspired by the legacy of Vlad Dracula III, the Romanian prince known for his brutality and cruelty to the point of being nicknamed Vlad the Impaler. Some say that the connection is pure coincidence, but that's another story. In almost every myth he was in, Count Dracula was a godless man who gave up everything for eternal life. Not a good plan in hindsight, especially when the sunlight burns you to a crisp, mirrors forget to show your reflection, you have to drink blood 24/7, and your castle is crawling with misplaced wildlife. But one day, after turning his most recent visitor, Reinfeld, completely insane, he set a course for London. What he lacked in terrifying deformities, he made up for in suaveness and subtlety. For days on end, he preyed on everyone he could find, but another legend rose to the occasion. His name was Van Helsing, and he knew what made vampires tick. Namely, an anticlimactic stake through the heart. It's alright, men have died on chamber pots for less. Unfortunately for him, the stake has become his seal and constant source of grief, alongside the sunlight. A litany of pseudo-sequels just continued to humiliate him until Larry Talbot, the famous werewolf, plunged with him into the sea, ending this cycle of evil and misery once and for all. We all want to break out deep inside. We want to embrace our vices once in a lifetime, if only to relieve stress or some other thing. However, there are those who would take that solution to its logical conclusion. Basically, scientists. Scientists that didn't know how much too far was when going through metaphysical boundaries. Titled A Strange Case before it got turned into the famous movie, this tale demonstrated why man bottles up some emotions. Otherwise, you might get 8 minutes cut out of the original film before it's all restored due to censorship problems. Our doctor, Jekyll, decides to find out how to dispel the evil in the hearts of man, with predictable results. In a stunning makeup sequence, we get to see mild-mannered Jekyll turn into the cruel and depraved Mr. Hyde. Take him outside, he'll bring you with the king. Take him to a bar, he'll act like a sex-crazed baboon the whole way through. Give him a date? What was that first thing I just told you? However, if there's one thing that can stop a monkey man like this, it's the fuzz. What were you expecting? Magic? Either way, Hyde left a mark on what it means to truly embrace your vices, and believe us, we don't want to go there either. To be called a freak would be an insult. However, in the context of the 30s, it was a title of just about everyone who didn't belong in society. Case in point, the sideshows of old. But to call them freaks even then would be a heartless thing to do. They were real people, not just in a moral sense, but none of these people are fakes. These actors truly are bearing what nature gave to them. From the many undersized, to the man with no legs, to the conjoined twins, to Prince Rolo, the man with no arms or legs. Whatever their afflictions, they power through life and live together as one big, happy family. But what's a family without personal drama coming from one of their respected members? Hans, a small person, is smitten with the trapeze artist, Cleopatra, who only marries him with the sole intent of murdering him for the inheritance and running away with the local strongman. Needless to say, this scheme falls short during her freak-out to the initiation ceremony. It doesn't take long for the rest to catch on and set up a trap, aided by a few sane normal souls. What follows is nothing but cold revenge. We never get to see what becomes of the strongman, but Cleopatra. Suffice to say, that was the only fake freak. Tragically, this film was banned for many years due to the mistaken belief that it was an unflattering account of human society. In reality, and as many in the future have pointed out, it only serves to show why our contempt for what is not considered normal should be condemned.
Offend one, and you offend them all.
Ancient Egypt was a land filled with the suffering of slaves, the building of famous architecture, the rule of pharaohs, and the worship of gods. It was a time when death was celebrated with the body being mummified and prepared to head into the afterlife. However, for one, that journey never came. In fact, death was far more preferable compared to the fate that fell upon this man. Imhotep, played by Boris Karloff, began as a humble priest until Princess Ankhesenamun died. He was never one to let go of a loved one's death, so he tried resurrecting her with forbidden magic until he was caught and mummified alive. That alone is bad enough, but some idiot left a scroll that proclaimed that anyone who could disturb his tomb would be beset by death. That scroll belonged to Thoth, the ibis-headed god, or in this version, the goddess of wisdom. Needless to say, some explorers inevitably awakened him, and, after shambling about and terrorizing for a while, he got citizenship and began a crusade to seek the reincarnation of his lost love. He almost succeeded with his powers over the mind, but some divine intervention saw to it that he ended up looking like he face-planted into the sun. Oh, and about the mummy that followed in the subpar sequels. Karis, let's move on from that or we'll be here forever.
No man ever suffered as I did for you, but the rest you may not know. Not until you are about to pass through the great night of terror and triumph. Until you are ready to face moments of horror for an eternity of love. Until I send back your spirit that has wandered through so many forms and so many ages.
The zombie. A person who should technically be dead. No, the flesh-eating variant had not graced the silver screen yet. Instead, the zombie that was given life by the mystical practice of voodoo was popularized in the 30s. Established in 19th century Africa for the sake of a terrible snake god, this magic was instrumental in turning men into mindless slaves. Case in point, the modus operandi of murder legendra. man of that name is already asking for trouble, but he made his evil clear when he started making a killing off zombified slaves and making deals with the romantically destitute. Unfortunately, this client didn't exactly get his money's worth when both he and the woman he was trying to steal got zombified. However, something stronger than the evil of murder and his odd hand gestures came into play. The power of love managed to free the woman, but the zombies had to be dispatched like Disney-mandated lemmings by being lured off a cliff. Murder, as all villains should, followed suit unwillingly. Little did anyone here know, the definition of zombie was not going to be just attributed to black magic soon. But for now, let's not get ahead of ourselves.
To the future, monsieur.
The Great Depression, no questions asked, was a dreadful time to be alive. Barely any food, little jobs, and every other misfortune you could think of plagued the land. So it stands to reason that reprieve was the go-to goal. Movies came into people's lives like never before, and one particular film tipped the scales in favor of excitement and profit. A king was crowned that day, though he wasn't human. He went by only one name: Kong. Spent his days on Skull Island, aka come here if you're tired of your Mortal Coil Island. Like a demented Australia, everything here wanted humans dead. From the stegosaurs, to the usually herbivorous Apatosaurus, to the deleted insect monsters, to all the rest. Tyrannosaurus Rex and Pteranodon even shared the island. However, Kong, the freakishly large gorilla, held dominion over the tribes. The tribesfolk feared him and fed him sacrifices at a rapid pace, but an actress named Ann Darrow happened to get tied up into his life alongside her ambitious filmmaker companions. From then, Kong smashes his special boundaries and does everything he can to protect her, despite her constant screaming. Woe betide any creature that dared to eat this one human. However, one rampage later, he found himself in New York, crowned the 8th wonder of the world. Suffice to say, the change of career wasn't good enough, and New York got its first kaiju attack. It all ended when, in a desperate attempt to keep his beloved, he headed up the Empire State Building and was summarily pumped up full of lead. However, in the same year, Son of Kong was released, which chronicled the tales of Kong's offspring, Coco, and the tears he and a few returning crew had to endure. It was here that, despite the lightness of the tone, we learned the island was sinking beneath the waves, taking the murderous legacy, and Coco himself, with it. Kong is often considered to be the first true giant monster in movies, and it's not hard to see why. The sheer imagination on the screen along with the phenomenal stop-motion work by Willis O'Brien made the giant gorilla into an instant film icon. It is also worth noting that this film was the chief inspiration for O'Brien's apprentice and successor, Ray Harryhausen. The act of turning invisible has been an art sought after by many of the most intelligent of minds. Imagine having the power to do anything you please with no one the wiser. Universal, in their era of greatness, created one such character who gained the gift, but at a terrible cost: his mind. Dr. Griffin was an antisocial but well-meaning scientist who dabbled in the drug known as monocaine and tried to turn it into something useful. However, he failed to account for the madness-inducing side effects, despite succeeding in turning himself invisible. In the end, he turned into a bandage-wearing vagrant that dedicated his life to trying to take over the world as soon as he jumped off the deep end. At best, he was an intolerable trickster. At worst, he was a mass murderer. His ego seemed to have ballooned somewhere along the line.
Power, I said. Power to walk into the gold vaults of the nations, into the secrets of kings, into the Holy of Holies. Power to make multitudes run squealing in terror at the touch of my little invisible finger. Even the moon's frightened of me, frightened to death. The whole world's frightened to death.
However, he learned too late that, unless you have a death wish, you don't go making tracks in the snow while the fuzz is out and about looking for you. Still, he died with regret, but at least he didn't see the awkward sequel we won't mention. Remember the Frankenstein's monster? Well, we might as well showcase one of his better sequels. In fact, it's generally considered to be better than the former with its themes on creation, where people like the monster belong, and even homosexuality, if the rumors were true. The purpose? Give the monster a mate. What could go wrong? Having survived the burning windmill, the monster is at it again, running from the populace and seeking solace from the cruel hands of society. His creator wants nothing to do with him, but Dr. Pretorius, his insane old friend, has concocted a scheme to create more of the monster's ilk. To forward this plan, Frankenstein's wife is kidnapped by the beast, and soon, the Doctor is forced to make a mate for his creation. Putting aside the implications of that, the Doctor managed to finish that job with flying colors. She actually didn't look half bad. Personality-wise? Well, let's just say the monster had his father and technical mother get to safety as he blew himself, his ungrateful bride, and Dr. Pretorius to kingdom come. If only he packed more explosives in that switch, he would have been free sooner from this admittingly long franchise. When the full moon rises, many monstrosities think it's time to own the night. However, one creature is especially feared when that lunar object rises. It is the unholy combination of the man and the wolf. His hunger is unending. His torment can only be stopped by death or some contrived thing they come up with every once in a while. We are not talking about Larry Talbot for now. Let's focus on the actual first werewolf that made headlines, however small they may have been. Wilfred, an esteemed florist that dabbled in even the strangest of plants, was having a nice vacation over in Tibet when he was suddenly savaged by such a beast. He survived, but that same werewolf was not only taking up residence in London, but he was bitten. Therefore, the curse of the werewolf had been transferred to him. The only way to stave off the curse was the bud of the rare Marifaza plant. Of course, you never want your cure to be rare, especially when you keep turning into this narrow-eyed, snaggle-toothed killer of men and women. Eventually, he found the original werewolf and made short work of him, but even that didn't stop him from wanting to kill his beloved. A well-placed bullet, however, did the trick, and he was even thankful for such a thing. If only the long line of furry killers would end here, worse was yet to come.
In a few moments now, I shall know why all this had to be.
Love is a fickle sort of thing. It can lead to happiness and ruin, marriage and cheating, a new age, and a catastrophic end. It's no surprise that obsession can come out of it. Case in point, Dr. Gogol. Gogol, played by acclaimed actor and Nazi prison camp escapee Peter Lorre, was a meek and odd but well-meaning surgeon who was hopelessly in love with Giovanni, the wife of an acclaimed pianist named Stefan. However, his luck changed when his unsuspecting rival was caught in a terrible train accident alongside a serial knife-throwing killer named Rollo. To save the man's playing ability, he grafted Rollo's hands onto Stefan's, leading to the unfortunate man having a bad habit of throwing sharp objects in occasional rages. To twist the knife even further, Gogol starts tormenting Stefan as the avenging Rollo, complete with spiffy metallic hands. However, Gogol goes too far off the deep end and kidnaps Giovanni. He continues to go downhill from there until he resolves to just up and kill her. Thankfully, Stefan arrives and the deadly hands of Rollo hit their mark. When two scientists find the same thing, two paths open up. One leads to fame and prosperity, the other leads to jealousy and self-destruction. For Dr. Janos Rook, he got the latter, and worse in this average yet somehow over-budget venture. Our good doctor had just made a remarkable discovery of his own. By looking at a comet through an advanced telescope, he could see in the past. Rather than focus on that, however, all attention went to the new material that it uncovered. In Africa, a spaceborne substance known as Radium-X became ripe for the taking. Unfortunately, while his colleagues profited, Janos was cursed with a radioactive touch. Driven mad by his predicament and the loss of any credit, he went on a murder spree, killing with just a touch and focusing on those who unintentionally wronged him. Not even Boris Karloff was safe. However, a combination of the growing instability of his body and a run-in with his well-meaning mother meant one thing: the only escape from this torment was death. Surprisingly, this plot matches the trouble that several female factory workers at the time dealt with in real life, namely handling supposedly safe radioactive materials while working, and later forming successful protests due to how harmful it all was. These were known as the Radium Girls, and they were certainly more memorable than this lukewarm but enjoyable film. At one point in time, man was not the dominant species. We had to rely on our complex brains and primordial tools as we were beset by Mother Nature and the monsters that thrived around us. However, if it's any consolation, dinosaurs were not among our tormentors. This acclaimed film, however, begs to differ. A warrior of the savage rock tribe, oversteps his bounds at dinner and has to rely on the much more peaceful shell tribe to survive upon getting exiled. Even worse, he has to deal with the creatures bent on sending humanity to an early grave. They include pigs dressed as ceratopsians to stiff allosaurs to lizards dressed to look like dinosaurs. These pet store actors would go on to be called slurposaurs, a somewhat derogatory phrase meant to poke fun at how see-through the attempted prehistoric life is. Still, this fight between an alligator dressed as Dimetrodon and a tegu dressed as a tegu remained an important piece of stock footage for years to come, perfect for the particularly lazy director. Eventually, Tubac earns his place with both tribes, especially after he helps fend off a giant rock iguana. Only an old age film, everyone. Bela Lugosi, despite his prestige as Count Dracula, had a hard time finding work as the years went on, but he still managed to make many Poverty Row films actually watchable. Specifically, the films by the producers Releasing Corporation. One cheaply made but still well-received film brought back his affinity with a certain companion of the vampire, namely, the vampire bat. Dr. Paul Carruthers was pleasant on the outside, but deep inside, he believed his reputation was underpaid and even laughed at behind his back. So what better solution than to transform a small bat into a remorseless killer through electricity? Anyone else would have braced for disappointment upon realizing he was just using a golden-crowned flying fox, an adorable fruit bat. Despite being the largest bat on record in nature, it would hardly be the monster he wanted, because as the name implies, this bat was more content eating fruits and flower nectar. But this is film after all, so there's little use applying logic. With a special lotion he concocted, he had people spread his substance all over their necks. The predictable soon happened, and the investigators started to close in. One bat dies by the gun, and the other, due to a mistake by Paul, slaughters her creator before getting shot down like an unwanted kite. And kite is putting it mildly. With all that said, the sequel was so much less memorable. King Kong's director, Ernest Shoestack, was already living on piles of money since his giant ape ran amok on the screen. However, he then decided to go in a new direction. A new form of filming had come to pass. The age of Technicolor was upon us, starting with The Mystery of the Wax Museum. However, Ernest decided to input his own film idea, as well as his tale of mad science. Dr. Alexander Thorkel was already bad to begin with, as there was no line he wouldn't cross to achieve the impossible. He even named his cat Satana, just to hammer it in. His latest experiment involved the shrinking of anybody he pleased, and, once that was done, made him go through a series of trials that sated his sadism. He even went the extra mile with a shotgun to the minuscule face. However, like the tale of Odysseus this film is loosely based on, he is blinded in one eye by the small folk, and one thing leads to another before he finds himself turning into a blue screen effect and falling down a mine shaft. We've talked about the legend of the werewolf before, but there is one that holds more prominence in the world of film. Made by the titan of the film companies, Universal, this new lupine creature was given to the actor Lon Chaney Jr., who would have to endure several movies playing as the Wolfman. Larry Talbot just wanted to visit his folks in a gypsy-filled land, but after he defends one of his loved ones from a monstrous wolf, he discovers the bite mark he received might be more severe than he thought. It's basically spelled out that he has become a werewolf. The effects used for the transformation sequence were said to have been painstakingly long and arduous to apply to Lon, but that's another story. Anyhow, Larry found himself grave robbing and tearing into each other's throats as the monster. There was only one way out. A silver object, specifically his father's cane, would put him out of his misery. While he was killed off, he was far from peace. His sudden resurrections would have him take on Frankenstein and even Dracula. After all of this hassle, it's little wonder he killed off the Dark Lord by jumping out a window into the water below. As future woodsgoers would tell you,
even a man who is pure in heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright.
love brings out the passion in all of us. That's a common known fact. However, there are moments like this that prove that it's best not to put jealousy or even a centuries-old curse into the mix, especially when involving women turning into dangerous Black Panthers. When the Malumaks were rampaging across Europe, some Christian peasants begged for salvation, even from Satan himself. He granted them powers to combat them, but the local authorities, including King John of Serbia, saw to it that they were exterminated for their crimes. A few survived though, including Irina Dubrovna. She was your average Virginial lady until you got her aroused, and when she was, we hope you can calm a monster cat like this. Things get complicated when her lover turns out not only to be indecisive, but a bit of a stone slab with zero charisma. Eventually, it all becomes too much for her, and she willfully lets another panther tear into her. As with most successful movies, this got a sequel that was well received and better acted, but it barely resembled the first film aside from the characters. Sometimes, the wolf within us doesn't have to break free by itself, it just needs a little push. Of the scientific kind, that is. Famed villain actor, George Zuko, saw it fit to play the role of an evil doctor practicing just that. Managing to get the replacement actor of Frankenstein's monster, Glenn Strange, to be his dim-witted assistant/test subject, Zuko played Dr. Lorenzo Cameron, who was ridiculed by a scientific community for proposing an army of wolf blood-infused men to fight against the Nazis. Naturally, he was not one to take criticism, and he turned his assistant, Pedro, into a rather stupid-looking wolf creature. One such killing happens to be wholly unnecessary, the death of a little girl, as if this were trying to ape that one time the Frankenstein's monster got out of line. However, the savagery of the wolf, as well as the abuse he regularly received, turned Pedro on his creator. Needless to say, just like the reputation of this film, the house, monster, and creator went up in flames. Of all monsters, none is more feared or real than the serial killer. All because of a terrible past, a psychosis, or just one bad day, a person can suddenly snap and declare his or her fellow man fair game. Jack the Ripper, the evasive London throat slasher, was one such villain that actually existed, but plenty of copycats have emerged in his wake, some of which weren't content with staying on the screen. Laird Krieger, a famous actor known for his villainous and comedic roles in the 40s, was happy to offer his services. Slade was a troubled man from the start. He was unable to control his emotions, especially around women, so he made a habit of murdering each one he came across. In his free time, he played it cool in a lodge he resided in, usually confronting his emotions in front of the amicable residents. Unfortunately, he gives into a lust for companionship and, not good with rejection, decides murder is the best course of action. All that warrants is a permanent stain on his spotless killing career, and he returns from whence his kind probably came from, the depths of the abyss. That's one way to remove the filth from the streets, we suppose.
If it was him, I'm glad.
As mentioned before, fear of the unknown is the basis for almost all monsters. However, as we've also seen here, things aren't always what they seem. Mankind is sometimes too quick to demonize the unordinary, and one such creature was the majestic, if not bizarre, manta ray. The giant oceanic manta ray is a peaceful, yet slightly imposing looking eater of plankton and small fish. It is also the largest ray in the world, with the greatest specimen weighing more than 1.5 tons. However, the locals were quick to call it the devilfish due to its size and appearance, and as such, this re-edit of a previous film, The Sea Fiend, was made. It tells of a young man named Jose stranded on an island that had beautiful women and great food. He found paradise here, until he learned of the people who wanted to take him back to civilization. Angered, he goaded them to the domain of a particularly violent manta ray that plagued the island to no end. However, it is here where we see what the manta ray truly is, a helpless creature hunted needlessly. It's harpooned and speared until it swims off, inevitably going to see its kind end up on the endangered species list. If only they knew what was also lurking beneath the depths. Whether male or female, the mighty creature known as Quetzalcoatl reigns supreme in the lore of the ancient Mesoamerican Aztecs. She was a great being, often taking the form of a winged serpent that maintained life and prosperity in her kingdom and usually abhorred sacrifices in her name, as the Aztecs were apt to do to please their other deities. However, film, probably due to her monstrous appearance, has not been kind to her. One such film was the complete waste of time that George Zuko found himself roped into. Even more galling, this was the work of an infamous filmmaker named Samuel Neufeld, who was fond of creating B-movies and changing his identity constantly like a confused chameleon. Taking up the name of Sherman Scott, he had Zuko play archaeologist Andrew Forbes. Forbes, out of hatred for how ignored he was, managed to steal the stiff kite prop of a beast that was Quetzalcoatl. Rome resigned herself to guarding the tomb of Emperor Montezuma. By giving a feather to one of his enemies, she went into a frenzy and pulled a devil bat on the chosen ones. However, this train wreck finally came to an end when Andrew accidentally happened to be caught with one of her feathers out in the open. Once again, the devil bat parallels complete themselves, even with the all-powerful goddess getting shot down by a pistol. Let's hope the actual winged serpent wasn't watching when this travesty played out. Most would think that the new age of color would bring forth only the finest of films, considering how rare it was at the time, even as the 40s were starting to end. However, such was not the case with this bomb, which, for all intents and purposes, should have remained unknown. In the French Polynesian Isles, an island untouched by time stands. While it has more hospitable natives than Skull Island could have, it still has its share of dangers for the unfortunate crew that has come to explore. Chief among them are utterly silly-looking Ceratosauruses passed off as Tyrannosaurs that won't stop squeaking and honking, and a giant gorilla. Actually, they refer to the thing incorrectly as a giant sloth, as if to futilely hide the fact that they are riding on the coattails of King Kong. In truth, a giant sloth did exist in our time. Megatherium was its name, and it spent most of its time eating plants, though some carrion might have gone to the mix too. Only its razor-sharp claws and strong arms posed a threat. Here, he made short work of the token traitor and fought off a Ceratosaurus before throwing it off a cliff. Not the worst prehistoric venture, but somewhere, a paleontologist is crying. As proven with Coco, not all gorillas were man-eating murderers in the movies. They just needed a little love and understanding. As in real life, gorillas are thinking animals that have even been reported to have their own individual concepts of good and evil. For now, a prominent figure or two rose up to make this last film happen. Their names were Ray Harryhausen and Willis O'Brien, the former's protag. Their job was to create a stop-motion spectacle about yet another ape monster that was misunderstood only to a greater degree. Thus, mighty Joe Young came on the scene. Joe Young was content to live his life in Africa with a girl who adopted him from a young age, Jill. However, as it turns out, the economy is just as bad, if not worse, in Africa than it is in America. So, when some humans intruded and offered the promise of showbiz, there was little choice but to leave their home. And as luck would have it, Joe happened to have the skills to pay the bills, as he became a smash hit with audiences in this version of Hollywood, whether it was musical accompaniment or showing up the strongest men there were. But loneliness and a sense of humiliation were not kind to the ape. Hitting the bottle was even worse, causing a rampage that resulted in him showing the true savagery of the ape against a pack of lions. Given the death penalty, he was thankfully swept away by his sister and some newfound friends. He even proved his worth to the world when he rescued orphans from a burning building. Needless to say, it was quite satisfying for audiences to see him live the rest of his days with his newfound family.